Pak Kamdi. Selamat siang Pak Kamdi, kita mulai ya Pak.
Ya.
Oke Ika. Oh ya Pak, apa boleh video Bapak dihidupkan? Oh ya, sudah Pak. Oke Pak, terima kasih. Nanti Bapak bisa berbicara setelah video opening ya Pak.
Oke.
Makasih Pak.
Bisa dimulai sekarang ya, Citra.
Bisa Pak, monggo Pak.
Good afternoon everybody. Selamat siang Pak Aris, Mbak Anis, Pak Salman. Pertama kali atas nama PSKK saya ingin menyampaikan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya atas kesediaan Bapak Ibu untuk menjadi narasumber dalam webinar ini. Setelah saya lihat daftar partisipan ini kelihatannya semuanya dari Indonesia. Mungkin I don't know whether we will talk in bahasa in English. It's up to Pak Aris, Mbak Anis, dan Pak Salman. Kepada para peserta, for the participant, if you have any question, please writing in the chat room. And we will collect the question. Then later on, we will deliver the question to the speakers. Prof. Aris, Mbak Anis, Pak Salman, we have not limited, but also doesn't mean that we will talk until night. So we have 20 to 25 minutes for each speakers to present the issues, and later on after the three speakers finish to presenting the issues, then we will open the question by looking at the list of the question in the chat room. We will have two types of presentation. The first one, Pak Aris, who prepare the video of presentation. We will play the video first, and then after Pak Aris finish the video, then I will let Pak Salman to continue the presentation, and then last but not least, Mbak Anis. So let we start with the first presentation from Pak Aris. For our colleagues in GBPS, please play the video from Pak Aris. Or Pak Aris, are you going to play yourself or from the
organizer, Pak?
Okay, thank you. Sekar, please play the Pak Aris presentation.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much for inviting me to make a presentation during this webinar, Dynamics of International Migration During and Post-COVID-19 Pandemic. Let me share with you what I'm thinking about this theme. I choose a title, Future Pattern of International Migration. This is, I think, is very related to the theme of this webinar, to anticipate what happened to the international migration during this pandemic and after the pandemic. This is the outline of my presentation. This is an ongoing project on future population dynamics. By the end of this presentation, I put reference at the end of presentation. And then I'll talk about the scope of discussion and conclusion. I put the conclusion earlier so that if you get bored with my presentation, you forget about my presentation and you already get the conclusion. One of the most difficult thing in discussing about migration is the concept itself. So I will start the discussion about the concept of population mobility. Population mobility is wider than migration. So I put the title here migration, but I am making discussion in the wider context, not only migration, but population mobility. I am using the framework of Zelensky 50 years ago on mobility transition. This paper is already old, 50 years ago, but the relevance is still very strong until today. And we will discuss about the relevance of today and tomorrow. One of the most article I like is the article by Baldwin 5 years ago about tree unbundling. Baldwin continued the Zelensky anticipation in 1971 with different approach. Even though with different approach, but his idea really deepened what Zelensky anticipated in the last stage of mobility transition. And then I will make concluding remarks by the end of the presentation. Migration is often one way, but mobility can be many ways and repetitive. That's why I put international migration as part of population mobility. There are two issues, international population mobility or internal population mobility. In the narrow scope, we talk about international migration and internal population mobility, internal migration. In the literature, there have been more discussion on international migration rather than internal migration. However, recently, not only recently, there have been many discussions too, emphasizing on the importance of internal migration or internal mobility, especially in a large country. A large country like China, India, Indonesia, internal mobility is very important. But especially during this pandemic, internal mobility has been rising. Even in a small country like Singapore and Brunei, internal mobility has been rising too. However, the relationship between internal and international mobility is still understudied, even between internal migration and international migration. The study on internal migration and international migration is still understudied. Digital revolution has been happening for almost 3 or 4 decades, and COVID-19 just happened, and the COVID-19 has accelerated the digital revolution, and it resulted in what I call population mobility revolution. This is voluntary population immobility, going nowhere, being everywhere, nationally and globally. So the revolution is from mobility to immobility, and this is voluntary. This global population mobility revolution is emerging demographic revolution. In the 1970s and 1990s, we witnessed a demographic revolution characterized by rapid decline in fertility and mortality. But this current demographic revolution is characterized by a drastic change in population mobility pattern. This is the conclusion of my presentation, that people are going nowhere but being everywhere. And this is the future dominant pattern of population mobility. And in the future, we will see more virtual cross-border population mobility during and post-COVID-19 pandemic. Migration is still there, but the role will be very different, will be very small. You may be confused why I talk about mobility and migration. I will discuss more on detail. What is population mobility? We have long-term and short-term population mobility, but the discussion is not related to little aspect. Here, we do not discuss involuntary mobility such as refugee. The topic of refugee is very important, but this is beyond the scope of this presentation. What is long-term population mobility? This is often called as migration. Migration is originally relating to uprooting from the origin. So people detach from the origin. People go to the destination and they are not connected at all with the origin. A new society, new network, new habit, everything is linked, uprooting. to manage their stress. People in the destination sometimes create diaspora in the areas of destination to remind them to the origin. And with the advanced telecommunication and transportation, the uprooting is becoming weak. Why? Because people in the destination could communicate very well with people in the origin, and they are not detached with the origin, and they are even able to visit the origin very quickly thanks to the advance in transportation. So in the modern time, the sense of uprooting in migration is becoming less. And empirically, how we measure migration? Migration is people who are staying or intending to stay longer than, for example, 12 months in the destination. And migrant themselves has many concepts like lifetime migrant, people whose current place of residence is different from the place of birth. Recent migrant, people whose current residence different from resident about 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or 1 year ago. Return migrant who return to the original place, and so on and so on. There are many concepts of migrants too, so we have to be careful. How about short-term population mobility? There is no uprooting. There is no uprooting, and they are still attached to the origin. People from Jakarta going to Bogor every week, for example, they still stay in Jakarta. They are not uprooting from Jakarta environment, but every day they go to Bogor in the morning and return to Jakarta in the morning. They are commuting. They are not uprooting. Or people from Pekalongan work as a driver in Jakarta and stay in Jakarta for 3 months, return to Pekalongan for 2 weeks, and then return to Jakarta again. This is circulating. They are still attached to the Pekalongan, the origin, but they are staying in Jakarta for 3 months. They are not migrant, because migrant is defined as staying in Jakarta for at least 12 months or 6 months. But because he is staying in Jakarta for 3 months, for example, they are not considered as migrant. They are circulating. Positional movement, they come to Jakarta only during the holiday season, and they return to the origin. This is seasonal movement. They stay in Jakarta for a while, so they are not considered as migrant. Another type of short-term population mobility is the type of population mobility who has never studied in the literature in the world. But to me, this is happening everywhere in the world, and this short-term mobility affects the life of people in the destination and the origin politically, economically, and socially. This is what I call wirawiri. Loosely speaking, this is random movement. In commuting, circulating, and seasonal movement, there is a repetitive movement, and then you can predict going in the morning, returning in the evening, going in 1 day, returning in the weekend, going by 3 months, 4 months, and so on. And the season. But wirawiri has no pattern at all. This is a Javanese word referring to sporadic, unexpected, non-repetitive, irregular pattern in terms of frequency of moving, in terms of time, in terms of distance and location of short-term population mobility. I tried to find the English terminology of wirawiri, but I couldn't because it has never been studied. And I tried to create English terminology, but I haven't been able to find the correct word for this type of movement. And I found a Javanese word is very good. To me, the wirawiri is very good in describing this type of short-term mobility. And this word I mentioned first in our paper in 2014, and then in my paper in 2021. Another type of mobility is immobility, not being mobile or staying. There are 2 kinds of immobility. First is involuntary immobility. They wish to be mobile, but they are unable to be mobile. This is mentioned by Carlin about 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago, and it is revived by Johnson in 2020, who talk about absence of freedom from cross-border movement. They want to go to other countries, but regulation and sentiment in the destination make them unable to go. The second is voluntary immobility. They are immobile, but that is what they want. And this is called virtual mobility. They go everywhere, but they don't go. Actually, they don't go, but they are everywhere. They prefer to be physically immobile, and this is facilitated by digital technology. This is what I call going nowhere, being everywhere. And this is the conclusion of the paper, that the future will be dominated by this pattern of mobility, nationally and internationally. Going nowhere, being everywhere, not by migration. An important issue of this mobility is between migrant and non-migrant, or between newcomers and local. The relationship is kind of love and hate relationship. Why? Because population mobility affects both origin and destination, economically, socially, and politically. Population mobility affects number of population and structure of population in the destination. The positive side is that migrants promote growth in the destination. They come to the destination because of shortage of workers in the destination. So they fill in the shortage and help the economy of destination. This is the positive side of migrant. And this is the negative side, migrant or newcomer versus local or migrant. Newcomers change population composition by ethnicity, religion, language, education, and norm. And this is what is called as third demographic transition by Coleman in 2006. This change in population composition may create conflict in the destination because of the rising sentiments toward foreigners, fear of disintegration, and social instability, and fear of erosion of identity. And this may occur especially because migrants, newcomers, are the selected few from the origins. They are usually more race-loving than the local, and they are then seen as competitor by the local. Now I will talk about population mobility transition. This is the framework I am using to anticipate the future pattern of population mobility. I used the hypothesis of population mobility by Wilbur Selensky 50 years ago. He is the pioneer in anticipating the trend in population mobility, not limited to migration. We talk about mobility in general, including migration. He discussed 5 stages of mobility transition. Even though the paper is already old 50 years ago, but still very relevant until today. For example, we can read the article by Skeldon 2012, 9 years ago, and Cook 3 years ago. And at the end of the presentation, I put some more references for literature we could read for better understanding about the issue. And more interestingly is the paper by Bollivan 5 years ago. Bollivan continued and expanded Selensky hypothesis, especially Selensky last stage of transition. We will discuss it in more detail. Before I elaborate what Selensky talked about mobility transition, I have to mention what Selensky meant by circulation. What Selensky meant circulation is what I call short-term population mobility. So commuting, circulating, seasonal movement, and wirawiri are called by Selensky as circulation. Selensky did not know about wirawiri, but all short-term mobility are called by circulation as short-term mobility. So when I mentioned about circulation of Selensky, what he means is short-term population mobility. He has 5 stages, and this is the first and second stages. First is pre-modern traditional society. In this society, there is almost no migration. It's very, very small number of people are migrating, uprooting with their origin. Uprooting is very difficult. There are some circulation, but still very limited. So the society is still very, very immobile. They are restricted by geographical area, transportation, communication, and so many things. They are relatively immobile. In the second stage, what is called early transitional society, we already see massive movement from rural to urban areas. We also notice out-migration to other countries. The out-migration mostly consists of low-skilled migrants. We also see some in-migrant from other countries, mostly highly skilled migrants. And this is the third and fourth stages. In the late transitional society, the third stages, we observe a slowing down of rural to urban movement. And we also notice that the out-migration of low-skilled migrants to other countries decline. Zelensky anticipates a turning point. There is a turning point. A country starts with sending low-skilled workers. Finally, there will be a turning point when the country is receiving more low-skilled workers. In the third stage, the out-migration of low-skilled migration is declining, approaching a turning point. At the same time, circulation, short-term mobility is rising. So during the third stage, circulation of short-term mobility started. In the fourth stage, on the advanced society, movement from rural to urban area dropped drastically because everywhere is already urbanized. What we see more is rising urban to urban movement. And here, the country has already passed the turning point of sending countries. They become receiving countries. They receive more low-skilled migrants from other countries. And during this fourth stage, we see significant international migration or short-term mobility of high-skilled persons, and significant further increase in circulation of short-term mobility. In the fifth stage, what we call as future super advanced society, this is 50 years ago. We anticipate there will be future super advanced society. Migration will be declining. We already saw this one will happen. And then emerging new form of population mobility. And then I see it as Virawiri. Virawiri will be one of the emerging new form of population mobility, and maybe also about voluntary immobility. And then we also anticipate that rising nationalism and stricter control of international migration. This is the schematic representation of Zelensky hypothesis. In graphic A, international migration, especially the out-migration of low-skilled workers, is rising from by the end of stage 1, and in the middle of stage 2 and stage 3 reach a peak and then declining. And then there is a turning point. And B, frontier world, because at the beginning of development, there is still many empty place, many frontier area. People are moving to the frontier area, but between second and third phase, it will reach the peak and declining. Rural urban is similar, is rising at the beginning and then declining. This is becoming more interesting. In graphic D, we see an increase in urban to urban and intra-urban movement. However, Zelensky did not anticipate that there will be de-urbanization. In my paper, I anticipate there will be de-urbanization in the world. People moving out from urban to rural area because of the technology. People in the rural area can get everything what they got in the urban area. In graphic E, is about circulation, short-term mobility. Zelensky anticipates that short-term population mobility will keep increasing, even though the increase starts getting smaller in the fifth stage. F and G are more interesting. He anticipated that potential migration will be absorbed by circulation. That is, migration may continue to rise in the absolute term, but the important has been replaced by circulation or short-term population mobility. That people choose more to circulate rather than migrate. Because if the technology of transportation is very advanced, communication advanced, people don't have to uproot from their origin. They could go in short-term, less than 12 months, and then return to the origin area. So that's why migration will be absorbed by circulation. G, the circulation itself, short-term mobility, will be replaced by communication system. And what I see today is that short-term mobility will be replaced by voluntary immobile. In will be replaced by virtual mobility. Now, what happened in literature since 1971? First is declining migration. It has been described in some literature on declining migration. You could read Skeleton paper in 2012, for example, and our paper in 2014, and Molloy in 2017, and there are some other papers that we could see about declining migration in many countries, even in Indonesia. And also some paper, there are many also mentioned about the rising nationalistic sentiment among countries who receive migrants become stronger and become political issue, hot political issue. And then robot and artificial intelligence will replace labor and international migrant. And it is one of the reasons that migrant consisting of low-skilled workers to other countries may decline in the future. Not only low-skilled workers, but migrant of high-skilled migrant may also face the same sentiment. The example is Brexit from UK, that is sentiment to the foreigner. Another important issue from Zelensky hypothesis, which is very relevant today, is the rising importance of short-term population mobility. It's by Skeleton 2012 and our paper 2021. When I prepared this presentation, I still put forthcoming because the publisher said it will be out on 2021, but it's still forthcoming. But 1 hour ago, before I did this recording, I already heard from the publisher it's already out. So I'm very happy that it's no longer forthcoming. It's just out from the publisher. Then we talk about Paul Burns 5 years ago about unbundling. He doesn't talk about mobility transition. He has a different approach. He talks about unbundling. But this enriched and deepened the analysis of Zelensky, especially Zelensky 5th stage, the last stage of mobility transition, super advanced society. Paul Burns said, before the three unbundling, production and consumption occur in the same region. In the first unbundling, there is cheaper movement of goods, and it happened in 1820 with the steam engine revolution and industrial revolution in Europe. With this revolution, the cost of moving goods become cheaper. Because cost of moving goods become cheaper, goods could be transported and consumed out of region of production. That's why consumption is unbundled from production. Before the first unbundling, consumption occurred in the same place of production. With the first unbundling, consumption is unbundled, is different. Consumption can be done in different place of production. In the second unbundling is happening when we have cheaper movement of ideas and knowledge. And this happened around 1990s with the advancement of ICT. And this advancement of ICT has made movement of ideas and knowledge easier, cheaper. Knowledge can be found everywhere in the world, can be transported easier. Technology can be transported from one region to another region. Therefore, production can be done everywhere in the world. Production doesn't have to be tied to the source of the ideas and knowledge. Third unbundling, this is anticipated by Baldwin. Baldwin did not see the pandemic yet at the time of the writing, but he said that there will be cheaper movement of people. Movement is on the quote unquote because it's not real movement, it is virtual movement. He said that with the advancement of digital technology, artificial intelligence and hologram technology, people make meeting cheaper and easier. People has virtual meeting. Like what we are doing today, I am in Pune, you are in Jakarta or other areas in Indonesia or even beyond Indonesia, we could discuss and talk. So with the Zoom, with the WhatsApp, even with the spatial chat, we could make it closer and closer to the real meeting. And Not long from now, I believe technology will make the virtual meeting closer and closer to the real meeting. I anticipate that the next 1 year or 2 years, when I'm giving a talk like this, then our webinar will becoming closer to the reality. We could have better chat on the Q&A. And this will result in voluntary immobility or virtual mobility. People may choose that one. This is the summary of what we'll talk about the 3 unbundling. Before unbundling, production and consumption were in the same region. With the first unbundling, consumption was unbundled from production. Consumption occurred outside the region of production. And then it takes about more than 100 years to have the second unbundling. Production was unbundled from the source of knowledge or idea. Production occurred everywhere. With the third unbundling, people are unbundled from location of work. People do not have to move physically to move in faraway location. This is the 5th stage of Salinsky hypothesis. Now, what is the concluding remark? First is that going nowhere, being everywhere as a conclusion, dominance of voluntary immobility, virtual mobility, including international mobility. We will have virtual cross-border mobility, not international migration. International migration may be still there, but virtual cross-border mobility will be more relevant. The next question, which is beyond my ability, is to talk about legal implication of this one. People in Jakarta may work in the United States without visa, without permit, and today we are still able to do that, but there can be legal implication in the future. So now, what will happen to international migration? The role of international migration will decline, though it may keep increasing in the future. Then we will see shifting from sending countries offload their workers to receiving countries. Until when? Until number of out and migration are almost equal. Then there will be rapidly rising virtual cross-border population mobility. There will be rising the dominant. And people will move intensively, domestically and internationally through virtual mode. A hybrid of virtual and in-person mobility will emerge. Even tourism, virtual tourism will be rising in importance in the future. And this is the reference. I will not read it, but you can find it more after the presentation. And thank you very much. Terima kasih, matur nuwun. Enjoy the virtual cross-border mobility.
Thank you, Pak Aris. For the participant, I'm sorry, I was not introducing Pak Aris in the beginning, but let me mention a short his biography. Prof. Aris Ananta is professor in economics from University of Indonesia, Jakarta, and now he is the head or the director of Aris, the Asia Population Association, and he is one of the prominent demographer in population studies in Indonesia as well as in the world. This is what I can mention about Prof. Aris, and I'm sure that a lot of you has already know about him. Thank you, Pak Aris, once more. And the next one, again, for the participant who want to ask about the issues raised by Pak Aris, please write in the chat room. Later on, after we finish the 3 speakers, we will deliver the question to the speakers. The next one, Pak Salman, this is your time. It's about 20 to 25 minutes. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sukamdi, for giving me the opportunity to be in a very honor session today with Professor Aris Ananta. I learned a lot from Professor Ananta, Aris Ananta from the earlier presentation. It's very concise but very broad issues brought about. I think it's a really interesting topic that we have. So it's indeed in my presentation. I hope the organizer can help me to present my note on the PowerPoint, because sometimes I'm quite confused when I have to put myself my presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is no doubt that the lingering issues on migration, migrant workers are complex. I think we all agree on it. That's why the issues has long been on the global political agenda. I think Professor Ananta has already mentioned a little bit about how people not quite welcome to the migrant coming to their country. Let me, in my presentation, talking about issues related to the protection of migrant workers in the context of international relations, indeed. And then my views would be representing the views from the government, if you may say, because at the panel, I'm the only government representative that speaking in the session. The right of migrant workers have been stipulated in many international conventions, including the UN International Convention on Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and their families, indeed, the ILO Convention on Migrants for the Employment, and the ILO Convention on the Migrant Workers. In fact, the right of migrant workers is also mentioned in many human rights conventions. First slide, please. However, the norm contained in the convention failed to regulate pro-migrant workers international cooperation as expected due to the limited numbers of countries that ratified them. So we have a very limited parties on the convention. That's why sometimes the convention cannot be used as the norm of the international cooperation. In 2012, Indonesia, as a responsible member of international community, ratified the United Nations Convention on the Protection of the Right of Migrant Workers and all members of their families. Thus, Indonesia has more robust legal instruments to protect the fundamental rights of migrant workers, including the protection of undocumented migrant workers. This is also we can learn from some paper from Misbah and Palmer and from Susilo in 2012. There are several reasons why many countries still do not ratify the Convention on the Protection of All Migrant Workers and their Families, among others, for technical reasons, some countries are reluctant to harmonize existing legal provision with the context of the convention, or to make new laws in line with the convention. For many developing countries, the convention places additional burden on creating a new governance environment that needs more resources to manage, such as preparing social security system, monitoring partners, applying strict sanction for brokers and placement agents that violate the provision, and providing institutional support, including the preparation of the protection system, as well as additional resource to the country's representative in the destination countries of migrant workers. Among developed countries, there is a view that substance of the convention is duplicate with various international conventions and agreements on human rights, so that the implementation of convention is inefficient. In terms of institutional capacity, developed countries do not encounter a significant problem. Even the prevailing laws and regulations in general are in line with the provision and norm contained in the convention. In fact, there is no obstacle to ratifying the convention. Although the number of state parties is not too many, the international community can still take the advantage of this global norm as a code of practice to protect migrant workers. Again, this backdrop, it is urgent to strengthen national commitment by putting in place right policies and regulations that provide firm protection to migrant workers. Let me move to the national context. For Indonesia, being the party of the convention, is part of her strong commitment to protect Indonesian migrant workers. The government must ensure that it does something to fulfill its obligation to protect the interests of citizens through appropriate rules and policies. It's explained by Budiarjo in 2008 and Damsar in 2010. Ensuring that the country of destination applied laws and regulations that guarantee the basic rights of migrant workers is part of the protection. It is also contained in the law number 18 2017 of the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. Based on the international law, a country can protect a citizen in another country as long as it can be proven as a legal citizen in the country of origin. Therefore, the enactment of law number 18 of 2017 on the protection of Indonesian workers is another concrete undertaking in cementing a solid basis on which governance on services of and protection of Indonesian migrant worker is properly managed. However, in the law mandate multiple stages of protection process, involving also multi-level government agencies from the village level to central government. That's why I have two basic question to raise. Firstly, whether the inter-stages of protection process and inter-agency policy interaction can take place in the sustainable manner. The second question is how do the policies and action of these various agencies interact harmoniously so that can improve the performance of the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protection Services. To answer this question, let us first review the progress of implementing regulation under Law Number 18 of 2017 on the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. Law Number 18, 2017 regulates new governance in the placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers. The law contains significant changes in the placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers, placing Indonesian migrant workers as an active subject with dignity and respect in it. Dignity as a human being, so that the state can provide protection guarantees from legal and social and economic aspects. Protection is not only protecting and overcoming a problem caused by abusive practices that are detrimental to Indonesian migrant workers, but also empowering them to become workers who have the ability and skill to increase their competitiveness. This is in line with the substance of the International Convention on the Protection of the Right of all migrant workers and members of their families. To implement the law, there are several implementing regulations mandated to be issued. There are 12 governing government regulation or peraturan pemerintah to be, but I have the information that the 12 government regulation will be simplified into 3 government regulations. There are also 2 presidential regulations to be issued, 11 ministerial regulation or permenaker to be simplified into 5 permenaker, and 3 head of agency regulation or BP2MI regulation. Until July 2001, the government of Indonesia has issued several implementing regulations. This is indeed beyond the deadline that, according to the law itself. The 2 government regulation comprise of PP number 10 of 2020 concerning the procedure of placement of Indonesian migrant workers by the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protection Agency. PP number 59 of 2021 concerning the implementation of the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. One presidential decree is the presidential decree on number 19 of 2019 concerning the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protection Agency. It's about the new BP2MI, and then there are the 5 permenaker are a regulation on the member of the Minister of Manpower number 18 2018 concerning the social security for Indonesian migrant workers. The permenaker on procedure for placement of Indonesian migrant workers. The permenaker on procedure for granting P3MI permit. The permenaker on termination of prohibition of placement of Indonesian migrant workers, and then concerning the procedure for imposing administrative sanction in the implementation of protection of Indonesian migrant workers. There are the 2 regulations issued by BP2MI include the regulation on standard signing and verification of Indonesian migrant workers work agreement, and the regulation on exemption of Indonesian migrant workers placement fees as amended by Regulation number 1, 2021, considering the on the exemption of the Indonesian migrant workers placement. There are still some regulation under consideration on the progress. The one, the long-waiting draft government regulation on the placement and protection of migrant trading vessel crew and migrant facing vessel crew, which I believe it is still on ongoing legal harmonization process, and then there has been submitted to the state secretariat. And then the second ongoing process is on the presidential regulation on duties and authorities of the labor attaché. It's under consideration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then draft PM2ME regulation on the process required for prospective Indonesian migrant workers before working. In fact, it's quite interesting progress on the regulation, although it is not part of the implementation of law number 18/2017. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs issues regulation, Permenlu number 5 of 2018 on the protection of Indonesian citizens abroad that complement to the implementation of the law 18/2017. The important things in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs regulation is the provision regarding the contingency condition that were not explicitly regulated in the previous regulation. In the previous regulation, namely Permenlu number 4/2008, the substance contained more about institution and procedures for services on protection at the representative of the Republic of Indonesia. And some of the substantive point in the prevailing laws and regulations include the following. The first one is on the division of duties and authorities. One of the essential content of the law number 18/2017 is the division of tasks and authorities of the government at every level, central and regional, in the protecting Indonesian migrant workers. Through the presidential regulation number 19 of 2019 concerning the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protection Agency, the government established the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protection Agency, or BP2ME, as a revitalization of the National Agency for the Placement and Protection of Indonesian Migrant Workers. This regulation also confirmed that BP2ME as the implementing agency for the placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers, and it can avoid overlapping of duties and authorities with the Ministry of Manpower as a regulator in managing the placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers. BP2ME therefore carries the task of implementing policies in the context of the placement and protection of the Indonesian migrants in an integrated manner. It is contained in Article number 4 of the regulation. The second important thing is the integration of data and information system. Protection against Indonesian migrant worker is a series of process from when a person become a Indonesian migrant workers candidate before living, while working, and upon retirement. This series of processes, of course, involve various authorities agencies. One of the keys to the continuity of smooth running of the process from one state to the other is the availability of and access to adequate information data. Government Regulation number 10 of 2020 concerning procedure for the placement of Indonesian migrant workers by the Indonesian Migrant Workers Protecting Agency provide guidelines for the integration of data information system developed by several agencies to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of managing the placement and the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. In particular, there are currently 3 data information systems operated in 3 main agencies, namely the computerized system for the placement of Indonesian migrant workers, or SISPO P2MI, the Integrated Manpower Information System, or SISNAKER, and the Ministry of Manpower, and the Indonesian Citizen Care Portal, or Portal Peduli WNI, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is integrated with the representative, with the system at the representative of the Republic of Indonesia abroad. The integration of the data and information system can also support a data sharing with relevant stakeholders according to their needs and interests. The third important issue in the regulations is on the education and training. The law guarantees Indonesian migrant workers' economic and social rights. Thus, empowerment is one of the crucial principles of Indonesian migrant management, as the main requirement for every person to work is working competence according to the position he or she will hold. Developing professional capacity that can pursue through education and training is a key. Government Regulation number 59 of 2021 concerning the implementation of the protection of the Indonesian migrant workers stipulate that the implementation of education and job training is carried out by the central government, provincial government, and the or agencies, regional government. Effort to scale up Indonesian migrant worker competencies should also involve accredited vocational education institution with extensive network. Capacity building and professional standardization of Indonesian migrant workers will be more effective in the increasing Indonesian competitiveness in the global job market if the government also increase cooperation with other countries to recognize their competency standard mutually. I think there are some important points. Indeed, there are still some issues like social security, which it is very important. There are some transformation of the social security governance from the private, more private basis. Now, government have more role to play in the management of the social security. The Minister of Manpower Regulation number 18 of 2018 concerning social security for Indonesian migrant workers with detail the type of social security program that include work accident insurance, death security, and then also old age security. I think there are some detail on that we can see from the regulation. There are some issues related to the regulation, in my last point in my presentation, I would like also to touch on some best practices that run by the Indonesian representative in abroad. I will take the case study in Singapore as part of my dissertation. The representative of the Republic Indonesia abroad have a vital role in the protection of Indonesian workers and the protection services of the Indonesian workers. The protective duties of while working, as stated in the law, are very detailed and contain tasks directly related to the status of protection before and after contractual work. Protection against Indonesian migrant workers while working in the destination country will depend on the completeness of the verified document before the Indonesian migrant workers depart. On the other hand, before the contract between Indonesian workers and the employee in the is processed, Indonesian representatives abroad are obliged also to provide the accurate information as possible, information as possible about the job market, prospective employees, and the work to be undertaken and working condition in the destination country. Thus, Indonesian migrant workers can have information about the situation she or he will face in the country before she or he will work later. The embassy has already established what we call as a protection protocol. And there are 5 standard procedure or SOP as part of the protocol for protection services for Indonesian migrant workers. Namely, the legalization of employment contract for prospective domestic workers through the online system, the domestic workers employer work contract extension facility, the agency accreditation and extension services in Singapore, job order legislation services, and handling of trouble domestic workers in the temporary shelter. All the services are supported by information and communication technology facility called as Smart Embassy. It must be underlined that the 5 protection protocol implemented by the Indonesian Embassy in Singapore have received international standard ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015, a standard system of quality management and quality assurance to ensure product service quality improvement in line with applicable regulation and improved governance. The conferment of this higher management standard award demonstrates the access of the Indonesian Embassy in Singapore in the success of the Indonesian Embassy in Singapore in maintaining the consistency and improving public service, especially protecting the Indonesian migrant workers. The Indonesian Embassy also organized the program that called Beyond Protection. As I mentioned earlier, the protection activities against Indonesian workers are not solely focused on administrative management, data collection, legal assistance, and counseling. But protection must also be based on the spirit of humanity to elevate the dignity of Indonesian migrant workers. Protection must place the Indonesian workers as the subject whose abilities are continuously fostered to increase their quality of life. In this case, the Service of Protection Program pursued by Indonesian Embassy in Singapore, as I mentioned before, as a beyond protection, is by empowerment and capacity building for through the provision of skill training in various fields of interest, including facilitation of to pursue higher education from high formal education through various package program and the open university. The benefit of such training and education.
I'm sorry, time is already.
Okay, Pak. Just 1 more minute. The benefit of the such training and education is strengthen the behavioral wisdom, which is more productive and away from consumptive pattern in utilizing the fund that they set aside while working overseas. The kind of training program is an effort also to develop skill and a social space for female migrant workers to meet each other, and the training program also should also be designed to build a perspective of migrant workers that skill development, performance appraisal, and certification of skill will expand their opportunities to find a better paying job abroad. So this kind of activities hopefully will develop what I should say as the building the ecosystem with a continuous protection policies in Indonesia. The continuous itself that from the pre-departure until and the upscaling program of for the migrant workers done in a proper way. I think that's all that I would like to say. Thank you very much for the time given to me. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Salman. I think it is very insightful concerning the labor migrant protection from the state perspectives. Now we have the last presenter, the one who really very active in international labor issues, Mbak Anis from Migrant Care. Mbak Anis, time is yours, please.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Pak Kamdi, for inviting me to join in this discussion. I learned more actually from Pak Aris. And I am so enjoying the presentation of Pak Aris. It's really insightful for me as people that actively in advocacy of Indonesian migrant workers, also from Pak Salman, from the government side. I think my sharing is not really interesting more. I only will share actually about what happened with Indonesian migrant workers during pandemic, almost 2 years. We handling so many situations, so many cases that facing by Indonesian migrant workers in various receiving countries. maybe not so interesting as before, Pak Aris and Pak Salman, but I will try to telling the story, what happened with Indonesian migrant workers during a pandemic. I will share the PowerPoint. I will try to share what happened actually with Indonesian migrant workers during the pandemic. As I look calculating, actually this COVID-19 crisis is having an unprecedented impact to so many sectors, including migrant workers. This is the biggest situation that migrant workers are among the most vulnerable groups as a victim, of course. Migrant workers represent maybe more than 4.7% of global workers, with nearly of half of them women that impacted by COVID-19. And if we are talking about migrant and workers, actually we are talking about half of Indonesian citizens, maybe more, because as we know, more than 100 million of Indonesian citizens are workers in Indonesia, and more than 9 million of Indonesian citizens are migrant workers abroad. So if we are talking about this issue, actually we are talking about half of Indonesian citizens in Indonesia and around the world. This number actually counting by the official of Indonesian government, and we believe that what happened in the real is more than this number. The impact of COVID-19 to Indonesian migrant workers, of course, they failed to be placed abroad since March 2 years ago. And the number always increase. Also the termination of the employment, the repatriated because of positive COVID and termination of the employment. So I believe that this number, that accounting by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Manpower, and National Body on the Placement and Protection of Migrant Workers, is still far from the fact. Yeah, actually, how many Indonesian migrant workers impacted by COVID-19? Gus Dur always said that only God understand how many actually Indonesian migrant workers abroad, and how many of them facing so many problems abroad, because more of them not official. And to anticipate the worst condition, actually ILO make some recommendation for all countries, for sending transit and receiving countries, how to make sure that migrant workers still under the protection of the government. So ILO make 6 key of the recommendation. About the first one is the key consideration for the ensuring that policy responses are developed based on rights and are gender sensitive. This is the important one, because like in Indonesia, the policies on the COVID response from the for example, from the Ministry of Manpower, it's really not a specific one for the returnee of Indonesian migrant workers that they also have the access for social aid. So this is still quite a problem. The second one is migrant workers are also included in the national income policy response and other related policies response. The third, expand access to health services and social protection for migrant workers. Based on our recent research in several receiving countries, migrant workers still pay the COVID tests by themselves, not covered by their employer or the destination countries. The fourth is provide adequate and accessible information. This is also important. The fifth one is ensure that migrant workers have legal status or do not fall under the illegal status. Based on our experience, for undocumented migrant workers, during the pandemic, the situation is worse than the legal migrant workers. And the last thing is provide all migrant workers with access to due process for unfair treatment. This is also happening with undocumented migrant workers, migrant domestic workers, seafarers, and some sectors that impacted by COVID-19. What happened with their work, what happened with their wage, what happened with their working hours, etc. This is the first story that we are receiving 2 years ago in migrant care. We are crying at that time, 2 years ago, when we received this picture from migrant workers in Sabah, Sarawak, during the first lockdown in Malaysia. They have no access for food every day. Most of them are daily workers. So when a lockdown happening, they really have no food for daily needed. So mereka memanggang tikus untuk bertahan hidup. So like how to survive their life, mereka mencari tikus di sekitar mereka untuk memanggang. Ini kisah benar-benar terjadi ya, karena kita menerima pengaduannya before Indonesian embassies coming to them to provide logistic to them. The other side, in the other sectors, for how migrant domestic workers also facing so many complex situations. The lockdown policies and restriction on the space of movement in destination countries make migrant domestic workers more vulnerable, of course, because the working hours are getting longer, there are no day off, there are no incentive to substitute for holidays. Work is getting tougher, vulnerable to gender-based violence, increased stress, etc. So we are receiving so many reports from migrant domestic workers themselves in Southeast Asia, in East Asia about this situation. This is come back again to Sarawak and Klang, a part of East Malaysia. The community of Indonesian migrant workers there really depend on the donation of Indonesian community during the first lockdown in Malaysia. Also from Indonesian representative, Indonesian embassy there. So if there are no assistance or donation, the condition also worse because the lockdown. The same condition also happening in Melaka. This is the community of Indonesian migrant workers there in Melaka. They survive from the assistance and donation, including from Indonesian representative. We also aware about the increasing of the violation of the rights of migrant workers. Like the survey of SPMI and Human Rights Working Group in 2020, about 54% of Indonesian migrant workers in the factory and construction sector do not earn a salary in Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. In Singapore and Hong Kong, the condition quite different. 95% of them, although still working and earning in salary, they get a double workloads, restriction on mobilization. So they get depression and do not get overtime payment. So this is like a common condition actually. In Taiwan, migrant workers in manufacturing sector and also in South Korea are not allowed to leave their homes or dormitories, so they start a face psychological problem. This is also based our survey. Generally, of course, the pandemic bringing the social and economic impact for Indonesian migrant workers. This is our research together between Migrant Care and Brawijaya University in the 7 destination countries of migrant workers. From this research, we understand that actually more than 8% of Indonesian migrant workers there not able to work, of course not able to send money to home. And then more than 20, they have no holidays again. Before a pandemic, of course, they have holidays. And then for some migrant domestic workers, 4.1%, they have no place for sleeping because every a member of the family in home during COVID. So for migrant domestic workers, they have no access for a specific accommodation. Also, 20% of them no wages or salary. Also, there are 8.3% there are domestic violence that receiving by migrant domestic workers. And 20% of them sending back home deported, because no access again for work in the destination country. On the still in 2020, I remember that Indonesian government actually changed the policies. I will come to here. Indonesian government policies to respond the pandemic. Actually, during March until August 2020, Ministry of Manpower of Republic Indonesia make the policy temporary moratorium of the placement of Indonesian migrant workers. Of course, this is the very good policy because of the pandemic condition. But in the middle of August last year, the Ministry of Manpower actually trying to reopening to 13 countries of destination, trying to facilitate Indonesian migrant workers replacement again to some receiving countries into 13 destination countries. But the target is not really happen because the restriction of the destination countries. And in this year, in January, the Indonesian government also reopening again into 21 destination countries to facilitate the Indonesian migrant workers that most of them felt going abroad because of the pandemic situation. But again, the target is not fulfilled because of the restriction of the mobility, because of the pandemic. So the first regulation that reopening in August last year, we call that don't make migrant workers as tumbal economy, because our condition, we still facing pandemic in Indonesia. In so many receiving countries also there are still fighting the pandemic. So in our perspective, when in the August last year, Indonesian government already opening the replacement of Indonesian migrant workers, we call this policy as a tumbal economy for the visa, because it's really not safe for our citizen. And we know that actually this target again not really fulfilled. In the other side, During the pandemic, migrant care handling so many cases of trafficking because the syndicate of the trafficking intensively recruiting people because we are in the national economic due to the pandemic. So why the syndicate work intensively, especially using social media, using Facebook for very easy how to finding the people going abroad. And we know that the concentration of the Indonesian government actually is dealing the COVID. So really, it's like the room for the syndicate trafficking is open more, and so many victims actually from so many various source of area migrant workers increasing during the pandemic. If we learn from another country, actually there are some policy from another country, like from Brazil, from Chile, from New Zealand, how some countries establish a support program for unemployment to face COVID-19 in emergency situation, yeah, like the program especially for migrants and refugees, like in Brazil, and then in Chile also established a COVID-19 emergency wages. They call Bono de Emergencia COVID-19. So in New Zealand also create a wage subsidy scheme, which is also available to migrants among other countries like Tunisia. Indonesia, we know that Indonesian government reallocate some budget from various ministries to handling the COVID-19. But again, for Indonesian migrant workers, there are no specific scheme for national budget like social aid, subsidy. The subsidy in the Ministry of Manpower, it's very general for workers, not migrant workers. So many repatriating, many migrant workers going home to Indonesia, they have no access for social aid, subsidy from BPJS and etc. This is happening because we are advocacy in 6 provinces in Indonesia during a pandemic, and migrant workers community have reporting to us about their situation. So what actually migrant workers need from the government during a pandemic? Of course, so many need so many support that migrant workers hope, yeah, from Indonesian government. For the subsidy, for the mask, for the basic need, a daily basic need, also support female migrant workers, also supporting for education, especially the education for the families of migrant workers, and also how to make sure if Indonesian migrant workers reopening the placement, they need like kepastian hukum, ya. So they already waiting for 2 years during the pandemic. If Indonesian government are reopening the placement to several countries, they hope that they will face really new protection from the Indonesian government. And my last point in this discussion is the recommendation from the economic, social, cultural perspective. I think we really need like alternative employment preparation for the reintegration of migrant workers, revitalization of the social assistance for the next 3 months or more for groups of workers and migrant workers, strengthen the coordination between central and local government. It's really still being a challenge. And then pre-employment card must be evaluated and revised, how to involve the policy of Indonesian migrant workers there. The second one is effectively of migration public services, like how optimization of the role of Indonesian embassies and consulate general during the pandemic, such as logistical assistance, solidarity, consensus, online services, etc. And then the third one, anticipating the trafficking syndicate, because they are working hard during the pandemic. And then the fourth, a counter narrative in the public, migrant workers as carrier of the virus, like Omicron. Yeah, if Indonesian announced that Omicron coming to Indonesia, who the groups that always being a carrier? Always migrant workers. Be careful with migrant workers from Hong Kong, from several countries. We all of us understand that not only migrant workers coming from abroad, there are so many various of citizens. There are diplomats, there are artists, there are etc. But only migrant workers always mentioning that will carry the new kind of the virus to Indonesia. And then reducing the vulnerability of the gender-based violence, and then anticipating the post-pandemic protocol of protection. I do agree with the Aris presentation, how Indonesian government should building the new roadmap, yeah, the protection post-pandemic, because I believe that after a pandemic, maybe next year, there will be so many massive people going abroad because the opportunity is very limited in Indonesia. And the last one, it's about omnibus law. Under the Mahkamah Constitution Court already eliminated unconstitutional, but actually some of the aturan turunan of the omnibus law already working, especially for Indonesian migrant workers, is the requirement for the perusahaan penempatan pekerja migran back to the all regulation. Persyaratan mendirikan perusahaan penempatan pekerja migran kembali kepada persyaratan semula, tidak sesuai dengan aturan yang ada di dalam Undang-Undang Perlindungan Pekerja Migran. Jadi dikembalikan kepada persyaratan izin usaha biasa. Ini menjadi bahaya karena di bawah Undang-Undang Perlindungan Pekerja Migran, perusahaan penempatan itu diatur sangat rigid, mereka harus punya deposito 5 miliar, karena itu untuk jaminan kalau ada perusahaan yang tidak bertanggung jawab. Dan ini tidak ada lagi karena Omnibus Law mencabut itu dari Undang-Undang Perlindungan Pekerja Migran, dan PP-nya sudah terbit, dan 126 perusahaan penempatan pekerja migran yang awalnya dicabut oleh pemerintah karena Undang-Undang Perlindungan Pekerja Migran dihidupkan kembali karena Omnibus Law. So this is my point, how the dangerous of the Omnibus Law, especially for Indonesian migrant workers. I think this my sharing. Thank you, Pak Kamdi, for giving me time, and I will learn from more discussion. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Mbak Anis. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I think we all glad you have here because we got the information from first hand, the one who really working on advocacy for international labor migrants. Okay, we have finished 3 presentations, but before I ask to the presenter to answer several questions from the participant, we have here a distinguished participant from Tam Kang University, Taiwan, Professor Jiang Bang Deng. So I would like to ask Prof. Deng to give a remark on these 3 presentations. Time is yours, Pak Deng, please. Prof. Deng, are you still with us?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. It's great for your invitation to this very meaningful meeting on migrant workers. I learned a lot from all the three presenters. For Professor Aris, he shared with us a lot about the mobilities. So the mobilities, this term is more broader than migration itself. Because migrations in the older times, we have a lot of different kind of migration, as Professor Aris mentions in the era of capitalism. And then nowadays we have more diversified patterns. Like when I studied the Chinese peoples, they go to China for work. Those people, they stay China for quite a long time, but they didn't change their citizenship. So they are a kind of transnational migrant. So they live in both countries. They live in China and both in Taiwan. So, and Professor Aris also shared with us about the new type of mobility, like virtual mobility. Mas Hakin also studied on this kind of topics. So this is probably very one of a very emerging type of international mobility in the futures. And I also learned from Dr. Salman about how we protection of the migrant workers, because this is a quite important issues, not only for Indonesia, but also for Taiwan, because we have more and more people go abroad. In Indonesia, we see the people go abroad from Salman's presentation. It's not only the low-skilled migrant workers, but also the skilled migrant workers, they go abroad. So skilled migrant workers and skilled migrant workers, those are both major type of international migration today. So how we give them more protections to those unskilled and those skilled. These two type of migrants are equally important to the host countries as well as the home countries. And also the Anis Hidayah share with us about the very practical experiences in the non-government organization. And during her presentation, I also learned that a lot of the Taiwanese government do not enough for caring about the migrant workers. I think this is a very good presentation, and to for the government like Taiwan, we have to do more for migrant workers in Taiwan. And we did not have a very serious lockdown, but as Anis mentioned, yes, in some of the factories during the time of this May, some of factory, because of the emerging cases of COVID-19 in Taiwan, so some of the factory, they locked down, and so the migrant worker cannot go out. But the NGO organization in Taiwan, they also for the government, they claim the government should better treatment to the migrant workers. So a few days later, the factory reopened, and then migrant workers can go out. And in just a few weeks ago, in Taiwan, in the central Taipei station, now the government also opened for the migrant workers. Regardless, they are documented migrant workers or undocumented migrant workers. The government provided them to have the shot of the vaccinations. So I think this is a way for the government to very sensitive on these issues, how to provide more protection to the migrant workers. And I learned a lot and very nice meetings and presentation from 3O presentations. Thank you. Terima kasih kembali.
Okay, thank you, Pak Deng. Dear participant, now we come to the discussion, and I have already make some notes on the question on the chat room, and some of them has already responded, at least by Pak Aris, for instance. Some maybe later on Pak Aris can elaborate the comment. First, we have at least 4 questions from the participant directed to Pak Aris Ananta. Pak Aris, you can select which one you prefer to answer, or you can answer the whole question with the short time constraint. The first one is from Nanang Widar Yoko. Yeah. The first question is, can the Zelensky's transition mobility model be applied to welfare transitions at the household level? The second one, does the concept of wirawiri only occur in short-term migration? And the second question, I think this is more comment from Professor Deng to Pak Aris. How you see the patterns of mobility to Indonesian migrants after the pandemic? Yeah. Could you share us your observation? And the third question from Anggi Rahajeng. In terms of regional development, what do you think about pro-cons, the impact and role of a short-term mobility to the origin, place, and destination? And the last question is for Basilika Putranti. Considering that short-term mobility and virtual mobility, as you mentioned, are currently becoming a new trend, do you think going abroad will still be preference for future generation Z or Alpha? This is for question for Aris. Because of the limit of time, so please answer not short, but please considering the time left. Please, Pak Aris.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Kamdi. Migration is what we call long-term population mobility. And short-term population mobility, there are many types of short-term mobility because migration is measured if people move after at least 6 months or 12 months. And there are many type of population mobility which happen before 6 months. And wirawiri is one of the short-term population mobility. So that's my first answer. And it will become very dominant in the future. And not only physical wirawiri, but will be virtual wirawiri. So, the physical international population mobility will be there, and people will still like to go to other countries physically. I still like to visit other countries too. I like to visit Indonesia. But the dominant feature will be on the virtual mobility, including the virtual wirawiri. For example, I just came from Paris, I just came from everywhere in the world, but I'm just staying in Brunei. I think that will be the future mobility, the future. And about international migration, Pak Deng, I think the same thing, the wirawiri not only from Indonesia to all over the world, but people from all over the world will come to Indonesia with a virtual mode. Pak Salman from Africa is here too. So that will be more common in the future, not more. And international migration, my prediction is that it will be declining, including low-skilled workers, because they will replace with the robotic technology, with the artificial intelligence and so on. So the demand will be declining. Maybe after 5 years, it's maybe too brave to predict that one, but my prediction is at least 5 years after 2025, we will see sign of declining demand for low-skilled workers because we will be replaced. And from Pak Nanang, whether there is relationship between mobility transition and welfare transition, I never thought about that. I'm working on the welfare transition and working for mobility transition, but I never try to relate. With your question, I will try to whether there is any relation, but at this time I do not know. And going abroad, yes, Indonesian will try to go abroad because more mobile, but they don't have to go abroad if they could do it virtually. So what I say that there will be more cross-border virtual mobility doesn't mean that it eliminates physical mobility. Physical mobility will still be there, but it doesn't have to do that. Like many business, they don't have to come personally to meet people, but with the hologram technology, the meeting can be very real. I could meet Pak Kamdi, and then the Pak Kamdi will be the double Pak Kamdi and double myself, and my double and my double can talk together. That may be happening in the next 10 years. Itu Pak Kamdi, terima kasih.
Thank you, Pak Aris. And there is one question from Pak Salman that also apply for Mbak Anis. The question is from Mbak Evi. I'm just curious why Mbak Evi not asking question to Pak Aris. Maybe will be discussed later on at home. The questions. This is the question. With the COVID-19 protocol requiring more things to do before and after departure, the cost of placement definitely increases. In your opinion, Pak Salman and Bu Anis, have you observed whether the number of months without salary received also increase? Please, Pak Salman, time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Kamdi. I think it's a very practical but very difficult question to answer. Firstly, it is very difficult because yes, I'm of the view with Mbak Anis that I think we need more action toward the protection of migrant workers, because as Mbak Anis said that the social protection is still very limited for migrant workers as compared to the protection given to those who are working in the country in Indonesia. So that's why I think we need a more vigilant on this issue. I think there is one regulation issued by the BM 2 ME waiving the cost of departure for the migrant workers. But I'm not sure if the test cost is also included in this case. That's why I think this issue should be become the serious consideration by the agency to and particularly the PM 2 ME to do and the complete assessment on this issue. But and the principle of waiving the cost for the migrant workers during the departure should be also include every cost related to that departure, including the test for COVID, to adhere with the health protocol needed if someone would like to go abroad as general people to do so. So I think that what I can say in this moment. I believe Mbak Anis in Jakarta can give more insight information on this issue. Thank you, Pak Kamdi.
Ya, thank you Pak Salman. Mbak Anis, in spite of having the question I mentioned before from Mbak Evi, there is one other question from Luki Anggi. The question is, from the research that has been done, how specific and severe is the reduction in remittances during the pandemic? And then, will there be a new trend of migration destination countries after the pandemic? Please, Mbak Anis.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Kamdi. I will add also to Bu Evi. Hello, Bu Evi. It's long time no see. Regarding with the recruitment cost during pandemic and maybe post-pandemic, I think will be increased, of course. But if I am not wrong, there are no new scheme of the salary of migrant workers after pandemic. In this time, only Indonesia and Malaysia we have negotiation time how to make the new standard of the salary of Indonesian migrant domestic workers there, but the negotiation is still going on process. We asking for increasing the salary, but Malaysia still in negotiation. So I think for another countries, there are no salary increasing after pandemic. But yeah, in that side, migrant workers have the new scheme for recruitment costs because we have to spend money for PCR, for example, and etc. About the new trend, I think Pak Aris already mentioned many things about the new trend. In my calculation, some sector of Indonesian migrant workers will back to the old model for work, like sector of palm oil, for example, construction, domestic workers, seafarers. It's the common of the sectors of Indonesian migrant workers, I think will be back to the hybrid model. Yeah, so migrant workers will still going abroad for 2 years or 3 years for the work contract and will renew. So the trend is still the same, but maybe the requirement it's different. Yeah. The requirement in Indonesia, the requirement in the destination country is different. But maybe in the different sectors, like in the manufacturing maybe, or another sectors will be a different style, will be different model to online. But which sector, which sector, we still don't know. There will be change. About the remittance, of course, menurun banyak ya. I think 16% until 17% of the remittance going down because of the pandemic, because of the number of migrant workers also going down because of the pandemic. So of course the remittance of Indonesian migrant workers going down until 15%, but still the remittance is the highest contribution of economic development dibandingkan dengan like a pariwisata or another sector in Indonesia. I think the remittance of Indonesian migrant workers is still have the more economic contribution to national economy. Thank you, Pak Kamdi.
Thank you, Mbak Anis. I hope I already mentioned all questions for the three presenters. And now we come to the end of this webinar. But before that, I just want to remind what Mbak Anis said, not here in the webinar, but in the other occasion, that don't call Indonesian labor migrant is pahlawan divisa, because it will make a different connotation, like sending good, so the protection is less and less. So as we hear here in the presentation, protection of labor have to be put on human right first, or the others, not economic or others aspect, but it is a right of migrants to have protection, especially from the state. Okay, thank you very much for all presenters, Prof. Aris, Pak Salman, Bu Anis. It's really, I really enjoy the presentation, and all of the content of the presentation is really insightful, at least for me. And hopefully, because now we in Center for Population and Policy Studies, we have a program what we call as a twin center. This is try to develop the network with all parties who interested in discussing and providing input for the government, especially about the international labor migration. I hope we still have chance to work together next time if COVID has disappeared, and then we can make a offline meeting in Jogja. And Pak Salman, I hope you finish the dissertation soon and before you move to other country. Thank you very much for your attention, and all participants, thank you very much for your attention in this webinar, and hope you can join again in our other webinar program. Thank you very much. Good
Pak Kamdi,
afternoon.
boleh kita foto bersama, Pak?
Oh yeah, that's why I will
Oh ya.
give the time to the organizer. Thank you very much, and bye bye.
Okay, dear all participants, we are going to have a photo session together. So if you don't mind, you can turn on your video. Okay, I will take 4 pictures 4 times. So okay, the first 1, 2, 3. Okay, the second time 1, 2, 3. Okay, the third time 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terima kasih Pak Aris, Mbak Anis, Pak Salman.
Terima kasih
Pak Salman, Pak Kamdi, Pak Joko,
Pak Aris.
Sampai ketemu. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Sampai jumpa.